Greetings! It is I, Tantus Naravan Dracovin, your Lord Emperor here at the Dracovin Empire, and welcome! It's time to continue our tour of Golarion, the Pathfinder role-playing games world. I hope you've been enjoying our visiting the many countries and locations across Golarion, and we have been focusing on a lot in Varisia and Garund, but those are the two major regions, and of course we will be visiting some of those other regions in the future. But don't worry about it. But for now, we have another Vastian territory, one that I hope you'll learning about. And this is one that I'm going to preface here. This is one that we're going to be visiting the entire territory, but I will be revisiting. What do I mean by that? Most times I talk about one of these regions, there's either one or two major cities, and a lot of times these major cities are just representations of the culture as a whole. They oftentimes represent that. They easily mention, and I don't have to talk about all of them. There's a difference here. Unlike something like the River Kingdoms, where there's one large city and then a lot of smaller kingdoms where we have a little bit of information and we can talk about them, there are 4 major city-states in the Varisian territory. So what I'm going to have to do in the future is revisit all 4 of them on their own. I thought about this, and I decided that's probably the best way to give all of these regions their own time of day. And maybe in a single episode, I'll visit like 2 of them, one after another, or something like that. Or in a day where I'm recording and streaming this live on Twitch, I'll do multiple ones and then upload them separately on YouTube. So if you're joining me on Twitch, hey, welcome for those people that are live. If you're joining me on YouTube, those join me live too. But either place is a great place to watch. Anyway, so, yeah, let's talk about Varisia, because that's, I guess, the best place to start with. And as I usually try to remember to do, and sometimes I fail to, I like to talk about what books you might be wanting to look at when it comes to looking into this yourself. Because I usually reference a lot of these books, but also check out the Pathfinder Wiki website and use that as a kind of outline for what we're talking about, and then add in anything appropriate to any of these regions. Which I'm going to tell you, there's a lot of stuff on the 4 city-states, so we're probably just going to stick mostly to the Wikipedia. City-states is where it really dives into a lot of stuff there. But first off, and I should throw myself over in the appropriate corner, I forget to remember to do that. The Pathfinder Chronicles campaign setting. The Lost Omens World Guide, that's for Pathfinder 2nd Edition, so it includes some information on the region from there. The Inner Sea World Guide, Rise of the Rune Lords. Why am I putting this here? Because the entire adventure path takes place in the Varisian region, or at least most of it does. So a lot of where you're visiting there revolves around Rise of the Rune Lords. It is the adventure path set in the region. So I definitely recommend, if you want to learn stuff about the region, check out the Adventure Path. And of course, there's the Varisia, Birthplace of Legend, Player's Condemned. All these books will provide you with a basics information on the Varisian region, give you a lot more when we talk about that. But let's talk about this entire region of Varisia then. So, it is part of the entire region known as the Saga Lands, which are the kind of northwestern areas of Vastia. And Varisia itself may have some of the earliest histories, much more than a lot of the established nations and territories within it. And even in more recent years, we're seeing that because this untamed region has come to a head with its history coming forth and settlement in the region. So we're seeing a region that was kind of untamed, had a deep history, where it had lost a lot of its population, be kind of repopulated. New settlements, things coming in here in the last bits of years. The Thassalonian Empire, the heart of this ancient empire that existed before Earthfall, before the end of the world, basically, comes from here. Thassalon, at its heart, was in the Varisian territory. So that's a very important part about it. That means it's got a deep, rich history. So, let's talk about that history. I mean, that's a good way to kind of segue into that entire thing and its history to talk about it. And I'll show you this nice Varisian map here. And just to note that the map of Varisia, a very good one is provided in the Shattered Star poster map folio. It's another location where you can find a large poster map of the region here. So, a bit much larger than this one, if you want a copy of it yourself. Anyway. So, Thassalon. That's where we begin in what is history of modern-day Varisia in a way. And that's over 10,000 years ago. This entire region, much of it was ruled over by this early human civilizations, the Thessalonian Empire. And it was an Avasti civilization. So it was Aslanti exiles that formed Thassalon. It was ruled over by rune lords, wizards that practiced powerful sin magic, as it was called, built huge monuments, had giant slave labor, like giants in having that slave labor. The indigenous humans were served by them in two castes, militia and providers. Militia were, of course, the armies. Providers were the farmers, craftspeople, miners, and mystics. It was a realm that was filled with corruption, warfare. Earthfall basically brought its downfall. It crumbled, brought chaos. Rune lords hid themselves in sanctuaries to escape death into a deep slumber, which most of them went into the millennium. Noting that if you want to see my new Thassalon episode, which was out previously, it should be up on the channel, that talks about the last of the Rune Lords waking up and those of them that survived. So out of the 7 Rune Lords, only 2 actually made their way into the modern day successfully. One not as much as the other. One that basically was like, what we did doesn't work anymore. We should try another way of doing things. That's a region, but it's not part here. But that's a legacy of Thassalon. And so you have to think about that legacy connects up with the rest of Varisia because the entire Thessalonian Empire was over this entire region. So, Earthfall. It happens. Things like the elven city of Selun Navian in the Varisian's Marinai Forest was abandoned and left Golarion. So that was another region that was abandoned, or ruins. Rune Lords are powerless, slumbering. The people that were in Varisia basically had to do on their own. The militia caste broke into clans. Several developed into the Shoanti people and began settling over modern-day Varisia. The provider caste evolved into what is known as today as the Varisians, which the land takes its name from, in half-now nomadic lifestyle. During the Age of Darkness, the dwarfs emerged in the quest for the sky. They built the sky citadel of Janderhof in the western Mindspin Mountains. Thousands upon thousands of years pass. The land, the people become more stable. The Shoanti battle giants and orcs. The Varisians roam across the region, spread out across Avastian. Varisia itself is ignored by a lot of empires to the south because it's too far away, and the Jarls of the land of Linorn King preferred raiding further south as it lacked any major coastal settlements. So it was just this ignored, massive region that had a huge history, ancient ruins, and things like that. And all this came to an end when the Chelish had their rapid expansion, known as the Even War, or the Ever War. So explorers went into the large wilderness region beginning in 4405, approximately 300 years before the modern time period in Golarion. Colonists enters the land through the Blood-Sworn Vale. This sparked a war between the settlers and the Shoanti. Lasted for nearly a century before the Shoanti were pushed back to the Scorval Plateau and other less desirable regions. The natives were removed from the most fertile land near the coast. Chelish colonists began to arrive in great numbers. And they had the pretext of bringing civilization and culture to the Varisia. They basically pulled a Spain from what we know of, except to their northern neighbors. It wasn't that. They didn't have to cross an ocean to do that. The next upheaval happened, of course, with the death of Eredin, the death of the god of humanity. Civil war went into Cheliax, which then Halthun took over and basically ascended to the throne. Devil worship took over Cheliax. A large portion of Korvosa, a major city-state in the region, left and founded Magnamar on the southwest coast of it. And since then, the two city-states have been vying for resources, not openly warring. The Shawanti have been growing strong and are getting ready for their own war from the north. So, a lot of things going on there. So let's talk about Varisia as a region then, too, because it is a vast, sparsely populated region in the northwest of the Vastian. So, if we're looking at the region, it stretches from the Steaming Sea in the west to the Mindspin Mountains in the east, from the Kodar Mountains and Conqueror's Bay to the south. It's got a lot of environments to it. It's got swampy mush fens, scorched frame cinderlands in the Storval Plateau. A lot of different regions. What else does it have there? Well, switch over to that. This is Thessalonian ruins. Let's talk about that. So that's something that it does have here. Thessalonian ruins. Giant monuments and buildings left over from ancient Thassalon throughout the region. Many having survived 10 millennium because the stone giant crafters that created it were masters, and the magic that the Rune Lords used to keep them up too. Most of the well-known ruins are things like the Cipher Gate in Riddleport, the Iris Span in Magmar, or the Grand Mastaba in Korvosa, or the Lady's Light and the Mushfens. Over the past few hundred years, the magic protecting many of these structures has beginning to fail, so they've been suffering from a lot more erosion. It's also made them more vulnerable to explorers or treasure seekers who want to see what the Thessalonians may have left over. Another large portion of this region are, of course, Grecian caravan routes. There are roads that have been developed from ancient routes traveled by the region's Varisian wanderers. They cross across the regions and connect most of its major cities. So there are a lot of major roads/caravan routes that not only exist within the Varisia territory, but some stretch even internationally for that. So, it's not a region without the ability to travel between the places. There are roads that travel between there for such an unsettled wilderness kind of area. Now, something I talked about at the beginning of this episode is we're not going to go into all the governments here, and I'm showing off you a picture of Kermaga, one of the 4 major city-states in Varisia. And I'm going to mention them and go over some basic information. These are each things that we're going to have to talk about on their own. So, Varisia as a whole, no central government. It's got these independent city-states that have a small collection of towns and villages, and wilds that kind of control the territory, which include, and there's some other areas that have their own territories, like the Storval Plateau is claimed by the Shawanti people. Politics in the entire region is dominated by competing aims of the criminals of Riddleport, the ambitious Magmar, the traditionals of Krova, and then you've got the neutral Keramaga that can't be discounted, but the inhabitants of Keramaga would prefer they're just ignored and left on their own. So, we have to talk about a little bit about each of them. We'll start with the 2 major settlements that descended from Chelish colonists, Korvosa and Magnamar. And yeah, they're only a few hundred years old. Korvosa is, of course, the largest. It was a Chelish colony, and it's the only one to have established a hereditary monarchy. When the Chelish Revolution came, House Thrun took over, thousands of Korvosans fled and settled Magnamar. disagreeing with basically the infernal-backed Chelish government and the idea of worshipping devils connecting to Asmodeus. Magnamar had been a location before. It had been a settlement, but it became a city-state with this influx of thousands of people. It made a true rival to Corvosa's economic dominance in the region, so the two have been in competition since then. Far northwest of these two is a pirate haven known as Riddleport. It's governed by a powerful overlord who rules with a harsh but kind of a laissez-faire attitude. So, does as need be. And of course, you've got Kermaga, which is the smallest of the 4 Varisian cities. It's on the highest part of the Storval Rise. It's in this anachronistic state with small power groups looking for their own interest within it, and it's its own thing. And as I said, these 4 city-states, which do take up a lot of what governs over the entire Varisian region, are kind of the ones that we will have to discuss in the future. And certainly, they'll have to have their own videos, as I said. Anyway, so, now that we have what is in the region, we should talk about who lives in this region. Who inhabitants? Inhabitants? Who are the inhabitants? Of course, a major group, and this is a smaller fishing village, actually. Olirant in southeastern Varisia. Who lives here? Well, humans are still the majority population. There are pockets of other people, and the ethnicities are Chilaxian, Shuanti, Parisian primarily, though there are some Kaldans, Ulfins, and even some Tien that have been settled into the region since its inception. Other groups are, of course, dwarves. Yanderholf is a large dwarf settlement. Remember I mentioned Yanderholf in the history, that it's one of the dwarven sky citadels? It's still in the region there, and still a major place for dwarves. It's been a big center of dwarven culture for millennia. It did make contact with the Chilaxian outpost, which became Fort Corvosa and eventually Corvosa. They formed a mutual protection treaty and had some trade. So, they've been in the region. They didn't fall to orcs. They managed to survive. It's one of the ancient sky citadels. They actually are in good terms with the Shuanti and the Corvosans. They're basically a trade partner with everybody in the region. And is the largest concentration, of course, dwarfs in the Varisian region. So, it is a location to keep in mind. But anyway, so you got dwarfs that live in the region. They mine, they smelt ore, they dig out things, they have tunnels, they have guides, mercenary merchants, and hunters for anybody that wants to look into some of the underground. They also are ingenious. There's exotic ore processing facility called the Gas Forges that are in Riddleport. You do see some half-elves, which it's unfortunate that they do have a lot of prejudice from both heritages in this region. And so oftentimes go to Riddleport or join with the Varisians, the Shuanti. Life is hard for them in Corvosa, though. That tends to be the place that they're, not great about. Halflings are also big in the region, and find a lot of big cities. Cheliacs and their bringing of slaves intended to be halflings during that time brought a lot of them there. But again, they spread out on their own. Some came on their own too. So in Magnamar, Riddleport, you can also find a lot of them there. With the Shuanti tribes, because that's near the hold of Belkazin, you will find half-orc children. Again, results of interactions are not always great between orcs and the Shuanti. So whether or not that child was a child of love or something else, it doesn't matter. Love, lust, something else, few survive into adulthood. It's just there's this competition between those two parts, which ends up being, unfortunately, tends to be violent a lot of times. I will have to talk more about the Shuanti tribes and stuff like that, because they are a major region, but yes. And of course, a lot of other smaller settlements and things like that are related to the, for city-states. So, when I talk a little bit more about Varisia, I'll talk about that too. So, keep those things in mind. Anyway, that's not to say there are other groups that live in this region too. A lot of other ones can be found here, just because of connections and travel. And it is a settlement. Remember, it is a place that is a colony, a settled colony. So that certainly screams to having travelers from across the regions visiting and coming in. So, let's talk about, of course, the next thing, which is what lives in here. Let's talk about some things that are non-humanoids for a moment, because there are some things that live here that are humanoids and honestly can be very easily discussed. We start with, of course, dragons. Dragons have been in Varisia for the longest time. And the thing is, because of the lack of population and some things like the native Shuanti that have other things to deal with, they haven't really had a lot of clashes with the civilized races or even humanoid populations in general. But as the populations grow, so do encounters with dragons. The place itself, lots of plant life, lots of creatures, a lot of extreme environments and geography. It's a frontier, a wild region, so things like dragons, giants, and ogres, which I'm going to talk about, are the three major groups that you can see. But there's also a lot of other strange monsters and stuff. You can always find things like Black Maga, which is a giant monster that dwells in Storval Deep. And north of the village of Turtleback Ferry. The Sandpoint Devil, or creatures like the Olifant of Yandalet. Goblins also pop up here in large amounts for other populations. But yes, giants. I did mention those. They do really make a home here, because, remember, Thassalon was mostly in this area. And what did I say? The Thessalonians enslaved giants to build their massive monuments. When Thassalon fell, when the Thessalonian Empire fell apart, the giants still inhabited this region. And so many have retreated to less settled regions of the Storval Plateau. The hill giants known as the Nashers. The hill giants are the Nashers and the Iron Peaks. Stone giants are in the Iron Peaks. This is actually one of the few regions it's very common to find cloud giants, even thousands of years after Thassalon had fallen. The ogres of this region are some of the most mysterious in the regions. They've got very destructive tribes, and it's sort of in between the settled people of the lower plains and the giants of the Storval Plateau. They come into conflict with both sides as their population expands, but a lot of times they fight and battle amongst themselves. And noting just a little bit about Storval Plateau, because I should mention it. It's the northern half of Varisia. It's contracted with the rest of the region. There's the 1,000-foot high Storval Rise. It's kind of arid and desolate, leads to the plateau. It's less populated. The basically lowlands to the south of the plateau are lush, more populable. The Shuanti, the Giants. It's got the Hellish Sinterlands in this regions. Storval Deep, Lake Scatha, Giltspar, Mohabit Lay, and then the Orc City of Urglin is in this area, and of course Kaer Mod. Getting some extra information this week, because I probably should have brought this up here. Noting on the predominantly Orc City of Urglin, it's the only population center in the Sinterlands. It was built on ancient ruins. It's between Varisia and the Hold of Belkazin. It's kind of a cesspool of villainy at this point in time. Has 5 neighborhoods, markets, the non-orc neighborhood of Pink Skin, the religious Bone Rattle District, the upper class Warmouth District, the orc slum of Ooze Front, and Scab Town, where the markets are. They've orcs moved into the place to build the place. It's like a little bit of the Hold of Belkazin outside of the Hold of Belkazin. There are marks of Shuanti things there that kind of mark that there perhaps is some there. Shuanti outcasts, giants, half-breeds of all kind live here. And this is arguably the most friendly to non-orcs of all orc settlements, but it doesn't say much. So it's a location in there which we can talk about. The Sinterlands we should mention too. Sorry, I probably should go on. This is an Ankeg attack in Sinterlands I'm showing off here, this image here. It's probably the most inhospitable of Varisia, a wasteland of ash and sand. It's basically the ember storms and the heat that's there. It's a desert. It's highly volcanic, with black blizzards known as ember storms across it, brush fires in the grasslands, eruptions of poisonous gas. It's kind of awful there. It's got some powerful creatures that live there, though. Ankags, Cinder Wolves, Storm Rocks, Uroks, Bush Tigers. Bush Tigers, which are really a type of hyena, which is kind of weird. But yeah, we'll just, say that. It's called a Bush Tiger, but it's technically a hyena. Giant geckos, and basilisks and other horrible things. Gargoyles, orcs, Shuanti, and some Varisians occasionally live there. Storval Deep is the big freshwater lake with a big monster in it. We talked about Lake Scatha is home of the Nashers, the group of hill giants. It's also in the Nashers, which is the mountain range nearby to it where the hill giants live. I mentioned that. And then Giltspur is an excavation of Thessalian ruins on the Storval Plateau. Driven by the blue dragon, Cardokaska, who basically slaved a bunch of giants and ogres and was having them search. And ghosts and skull rippers are not a deterrent for finding treasure. Oh yeah, skull rippers. That's just a pleasant thing. And Mohab Lays, the steps into hell. So that's what it's known as. It's a circular pit located at the base of the Kodar Mountains. It's very deep. But it goes in the Darklands. That's the Storval Plateau, which I should talk about, and I did just now. We can mention the Iron Peaks briefly. That's where Storval Deep is, of course. And two of the major rivers, the Muskal goes through here, and Skull River, which are two of the major rivers. There's also Lampark River in this region, so a lot of big rivers go through it. Is that everything about Varisia that I should really mention off the top of my head? Remembering some of the geography. Whew. Anyway, I think that's about it for Varisia as a territory. Going over some of the smaller areas and regions and stuff like that, and some of the various geographies, you know? Yeah. And we can mention the Mushfins, because I didn't go into them a little bit. Which, that's probably a good thing to discuss briefly. And, we'll switch over to that there for that. So, Mushfins, there's a Thassilonian ruin in them. It's the swamp on the southern coast of Varisia. Is the largest marsh in all of Vastia. It's close to Magnamar and Corvosa. It's wilderness, with a lot of unpleasant creatures in it. It's land south of the Gunas Baskari River. Earthfall created this swamp. It turns out it was a swamp before then. So a lot of Thassilonian ruins are in here because of that. Basically, it sunk a little bit, the entire region here, and therefore turned mushy and swampy. The land dropped in this region. Yep. Oh, there's a lot of local dishes and stuff to eat there, too. There's faceless stalkers, goblins, black dragons, moss giants, boggards, the Mabogo, which are supposed to be the ancestors of boggards. Bunyips in shallow waters. Specters are in there. Fangflies, dragon wasp, moss pigs, swamp barracudas. And the hunters of the area are known to trap and skin raccoons for their pelts. And it is the place that there are most abundant of all black dragons and probably all of Vastian. They are marsh-dwelling and is the largest... Oh, no. It is, for whatever reason, it is the largest marsh, and you would think that would have the most black dragons. But no. Black dragons avoid this swamp for thousands of years. Basically, they think that the Rune Lords enslaved their ancestors with powerful magic, and basically, you know, the black dragons fled and never return. It has been a swamp since those days, but anyway, black dragons don't want to go to the mush fens, strangely enough. A lot of goblins live there, though, too, in the ancient ruins. The Breakbag, Hound Gutter, and Wind Whisper tribes are particularly free to note. Alright, now I think I've hit everything. I kind of got a lot of that regional stuff there. And going back to the map of Varisia, let me just check that as we go back. There we go. So I can take a look here to see if I'm missing any regions too. You can see the Mushfriends on there. Storval Plateau, the Cinderlands, and a lot of stuff there. Cool. I think I mentioned everything I need to talk about this region. I wanted to make sure I got everything, honestly. I think that's one of those things is that, as I said, I use multiple sources, and I particularly use the Wikipedia page as a kind of guide, and then I reference a lot of books. So, a bunch of these things I had to reference and kind of put that together a little bit more of a coherent picture of Varisia, and add in a little bit of extra things about talking about things like the Storval Plateau, the Mushlands, the Cinderlands, these various regions. But the Velashu Uplands, I don't think there's anything to talk about there. Not really, just making sure. They're home to the horsemen, who are the finest horse breeders in all of Varisia. And those are home to a lot of wild horses. And there's old traveling through there, leading all the way up to the Red Mountains, to Brinewall, and the land of the Linor Cave. And threat of raiders from the No-Lands are the big thing here. There's also White Dragon in the Coder Mountains to the east. and some Thessalonian ruins. Not much else there. There we go. Another place there, because I saw it there, and I'm like, we can talk about that. Honestly, again, I think the big thing is I will talk about more stuff in this region in the future, because, as I said, well, I've only hit on maybe half the stuff here. Because there are the 4 city-states and everything around them, and their territories and what they control, and their areas of influence. Those are important things to talk about, and it'll be a thing that I will have to talk about another day. Diving into the 4 of them and letting you know more about them. For now, though, I think we can leave our visit to Varisia as a region on its own. And, there might be more places like this in the future that I'm visiting a region as a whole and then talking about smaller city-states or settlements within it that are important to talk about. We'll have to see if we find more of them as we continue our tour across Golarion. But I hope you learned about Varisia, and it's a very interesting place that has had origins and connections to more than just the rise of the Rune Lord's adventure path. But if you think about it, Varisia is pretty much the origin of Pathfinder a little bit. You may say, well, what do you mean by that? And think about this. The first major adventure path, where did it start? Sandpoint. It's a city, a town, under Magnamar in the Varisian region. The region of Varisia. That is the origin of the first adventure path and a lot of Pathfinder adventures since then. So I can safely say, just by taking this as an example, Varisia is a very important place, at least into the existence and evolution of Pathfinder lore as a whole. Whether or not it's a major location in Golarion itself, I'm going to say it honestly really is. It does have ruins of an ancient empire. Yes, the Rune Lords try to come back here, but all of them were killed except for 2. And those 2 accept themselves in the modern-day world. New Thassalon again. But the fact is, yeah, adventure paths happen here. A lot of other origins of stuff. It's connected with a lot of adventure here. And I think that's why Varisia as a region is an important place to talk about. It's a home of adventure. It is one of those places where there's so much history, legends, things going on, that certainly it is much more unstable and much more, not the kind of unstable that would keep, revolutions and stuff. It's a realm of adventure. And so, yeah, it's not a great, super important place in all of Golarion. Has some importance, but really not huge amounts of it. But to us that play Pathfinder, it's a big one. It's an important one to kind of talk about and look at. And know about the 4 cities there, honestly, and that'll be a fun thing to kind of revisit this entire topic with, and hit up them. But I hope you enjoyed learning about Varisia today. It was an interesting one to dive into, talk about, and certainly go over a lot of these places and things you can see there, and creatures that we do. Have you ever done any of the adventures in Varisia, or used Varisia? That's our question for today. So answer it if you are live here. You can always answer it now. Or if you're just watching this on YouTube, answer it in my YouTube comments. So that's the thing, is this video is streamed and recorded live on Twitch. So you can always check me out live there every Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. Pathfinder days have traditionally been on Thursdays, though occasionally on Tuesdays. Usually it's early afternoon for Tuesdays and Thursdays, and late morning for the Saturdays. I'd recommend, if you're checking this on YouTube, hey, give me a follow over on Twitch. If you're watching this on Twitch, hey, give me a subscription over on YouTube. Give a follow, kind of the version of follow over there. Great way for other support is, of course, liking the video over on YouTube, leaving a comment, especially the question I asked, or even ringing that bell to get more information about that. Other places you can find me, of course, are on my social media. I've got my Discord, which is linked below, and my Twitter.com. Both of those places, I usually give brain farts of information, little chats, and honestly, mostly my schedule. Other parts of the schedule, I do other streams during the week. I have a Pathfinder live play, which I specifically mentioned on these Pathfinder videos, or try to remember to. That's every Wednesday evenings, 9 p.m. EST. Up here's the Shackles Sea. We're playing a adapted version of the Skulls and Shackles adventure. So, connects up with a region we haven't talked about on the Gazetteer yet. I've actually been saving that until the Up here's Shackles Sea is done. That was my plan, is to have that one after it's completed. Right after, that's kind of like the crown jewel, talking about that. And then I have Discussing Tabletop, where we talk about tabletop news and other such. Avery. Saturday evening at 6 p.m. EST. That's the basic schedule. And also do some gaming streams on Monday, Wednesday, Fridays, if you want to check it out. These videos usually go up a few days after they've been live streamed on Twitch. So, you know, you can catch them early, or you can catch them when they come on YouTube. Anyway, all of you out there, I hope you enjoyed, learned a few things or two. Maybe you want to either use Varisia, or maybe some of those adventure paths or adventures that have been set in there are interesting now. They're actually pretty fun. I really enjoyed the Bias of Moonlords. It's the one that I can point out that I say, I played through that one. I think I actually didn't finish it. We got to book 6 right at the end of it, when things happened and we couldn't finish it. That's still 5 of the books that I played through. Alright. I'm going to get going. I'm going to say farewell to all of you out there. Have a great day. Enjoy the rest of your days. Stay safe. Stay healthy. And until the next time you join me for adventures in Golarion or any other tabletop, I bid you a wonderful and wholehearted farewell.